Everybody here this evening. I'm going to ask, how many Republicans in the room? Yay. All right. Yay. How many Democrats in the room? One. So we're an open party. So I'm Caryn Tyson, currently in the Kansas Senate. I represent the 12th district. It encompasses 6 counties. It is Franklin, Anderson, Allen, Glenn, Northern Bourbon, and Miami. And as one of my state reps says, he has a little bit of bourbon every evening. Well, I have a little bit more than him. So for a teetotaler, that's quite a bit. I'm so glad to be here and glad you guys invited me. I'm currently the tax chairman in the Kansas Senate, and I think that's probably why I got the invitation. I also have another hat that I'm wearing these days. Lynn Jenkins announced that she's not running for 2nd District Congress, and so I'm running for her seat, along with thank you very much. Yeah, it's going to be an interesting race, but we need to keep that seat red. And agriculture. Agriculture is so important to our state, and you guys know that. Sometimes we, in the Kansas legislature, it's interesting. We've had you think it's the Democrat and Republican divide, but it's not so much these days. It's the rural versus urban divide. In fact, we had a state legislator there was about 10 of us. We were walking from a meeting, and one of them said, well, I'm tired of paying for all the roads and bridges for western Kansas and rural Kansas. And one of the other ones piped up and said, well, we're tired of sending food for you. And the one that from Johnson County said, well, that's okay. We'll just go to the grocery store for our food. we seriously have an education problem. They don't understand the Kansas economy and how it works and how critical rural Kansas is. I'm so glad to see you guys here. You're engaged and you're ready to move forward on issues, and that's what we need. And we need you to reach out to friends and family who have never been involved before. This stuff is critical. I ask, when I speak to high school and college students, I ask them a question, and I'll ask you guys, can you name one aspect of your life, one aspect that government's not involved with? Just one.
Sleep.
Sleeping? Actually, your bed is government
That's right, can't cut off those
regulated.
tags.
Yeah, you can't tear those tags off. It's hard to find anything, and so that tells you how important it is. But I'll get into a little bit of, I'm a software engineer by trade. I am not political, I am an elected official now, so I guess that labels me as a politician, but I don't fit the word. My husband says I'm too honest for it. You know, we are a citizen legislature. That's what our government was founded on, and that's who we are. At the local, at the state, and the federal level. We need individuals that understand what are our values, our strong Kansas values, and we'll take those to Topeka or Washington, and we'll vote how they say. I was visiting with my dad, and we were talking about my palm card, and I said, I wish all the legislators in Topeka would just vote how they campaigned. He said, you mean they don't do that? I said, no, Dad, they don't. They go up there, and they are willing to tell you whatever they think you want to hear to get elected, and then they'll go up and vote the opposite. Well, the nice thing about social media these days is it's changing that. It's not as easy to do anymore because your votes are transparent, and I'm very happy about that. In fact, I have a newsletter. If any of you want, I'm glad to send you my newsletter. I tell you how and why I voted. I think we need more of that transparency. I'll get into my background again. I've got a master's from KU. I've got an engineering management, a math degree from K-State, and a computer science degree from K-State. Like I said, this is not my trade. My trade is software engineering. But this is so important. I used to work on different contracts, and one of them, most notably, was NASA. I was a space shuttle engineer for NASA. And it taught me about government waste in a big way. And we have this at the state level too, and I've had some success there. But our state budget was a baseline budget, meaning you take last year's budget and then you go up from there. And so if they didn't get an increase, they'd call it a cut. When I first got elected to the House, I was in the House one term, I got a small group of legislators, a coalition together, and we brainstormed and came up with a 2-year budget cycle. So what that does is that helps Kansas work. We do the budget cycle for 2 years now. The Governor Brownback implemented that, and that helps schools know what their budget's going to be from year to year. Another success that I had was the Secretary of Ag was testifying, and she said something about the budget. I said, would you be willing to do a zero-based budget? Meaning start from zero, not from the baseline. And she did it. She did a very good job. It was very difficult for her, and I was able to take that to other legislators and convince them that we needed to change our budget process. So Kansas now has a performance-based budget, meaning that each agency and department and program list why they exist, whether it's through statutes, rules and regs, or somebody made it up. But at least we can start as 90-day legislators, part-time legislators, at least it's supposed to be 90 days or less. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. We can work on the budget and start finding inefficiencies. Well, that's the attitude I want to take to DC. Not just complain about stuff. Let's start getting solutions and get things fixed. And the tax chairman, I was in the House one term, then I'm in the Senate. I was elected to the Senate because of redistricting, and it was funny. I was the vice chair of tax, and we had the second largest tax increase in the state of Kansas. It was unbelievable, and I still voted no because that wasn't the right thing. We don't get that so much here in the central Kansas as the border counties do, but you try raising the sales tax in our state, what does it do? It drives business across the state line. And so that's what that bill did, and then we had that other massive tax increase. It's a matter of spending. We don't have a taxing problem in Kansas, we have a spending problem. And I can give you a little bit of history on 2012 tax cuts. How many heard about those? Almost everybody in the room. Well, you didn't get the whole story. That wasn't the complete story. What happened was, yes, we cut taxes in 2012, but in 2013, there were cuts. In 14, there were cuts. In 15, there were cuts. There were built-in cuts to continue until 2018. How many knew about that? So it wasn't the 2012 business tax cuts that you heard about that caused the problem. There was more to it than that. So we had those continued cuts. We had a continued increased budget. The budget kept getting bigger and bigger. Well, you can tell where this is going, can't you? Yeah. And on top of that, agriculture, oil and gas, and aeronautics, our three biggest industries in the state. We took a hit, a hard hit. So I called it the perfect storm. That's exactly what we had that went on in Kansas. So they can blame it on the 2012 tax cuts all they want, but there was more to that equation than that. So the principles that he read for our Republican principles, I absolutely stand by those. Less government, individual freedom, traditional values, and economic development. It's that simple. And it's not complicated. When you get a bill in front of you, you put those values before you. Does it match it? Yes. Does it not? Okay, you vote no. I voted no on quite a few bills. In fact, I'm usually the #1 freedom fighter in the Senate. So I will open it up for questions. If you guys have any questions, I could talk government all night and I don't want to bore you, but I'm very passionate about this stuff, you can tell. So, any questions?
School's going to get us going higher and higher on taxes?
Yes, if we continue this path. Yes, the tax bill that the education bill, there were two bills. One was in the Senate, one was in the House. The Senate version increased funding by about a couple $100 million. The House version was by about $500 million.
9 hours debate.
And what was, if you look at the House version, the one that's being sent to the governor, it actually hurts our rural schools. In fact, one of my old classmates, her granddaughter called me from Hugoton, Kansas today and asked how the rural students could come up to Topeka on April 26th to make a difference because they're afraid that their schools are going to be harmed by this legislation. Even though it's over a $500 million increase, they're going to get less money. So the devil's in the details on this stuff. It's not about the money anymore. We spend over $4 billion for 286 school districts. But the number that's really not getting talked about that needs to be, we're over $6 billion in debt for school bonding. $6 billion for school bonding. That's more than KDOT. We really need to look at where the money's getting to and how we're spending the money. The money needs to get to the classroom and to the teachers. So, any other questions?
Yeah, but,
Sure.
question on social
This
issues.
isn't fair. He knows the answer now.
Yeah, I know your voting record.
Yeah.
Traditional values. You voted for the Adoption Protection Act.
I did.
And it passed the Senate with a good number and got over to the House and it failed. Could you explain what the Adoption Protection Act is, why you felt it was the right vote?
Gladly. The Adoption Protection Act, if you haven't heard about it, it's gotten a bad reputation. It's not what the press or what's been put out there. What it is if we would pass this legislation, it would allow faith-based adoption agencies to contract or subcontract with the state government. It's not excluding anyone or anything. It's opening up the options that we have for adoption. If a mother is going to give up her child, she wants to have some say as to where that child goes. And so this would allow them to choose if they wanted to go through a certain faith-based adoption agency through the government, through contracting. It wasn't excluding anybody. It wasn't disallowing, same-sex adoptions. It was portrayed as that, but that was not what the bill did. In fact, it would protect that more than it does now. So we need this legislation so that those faith-based adoption agencies that are currently in Kansas, they are feeling threatened throughout the nation, and they are afraid that they will have to close their doors if they don't have this legislation to protect them. We're on a dangerous path with our country. We're not only being threatened from outside our borders, we're being threatened from within. We are gradually losing our freedoms by legislation and rules and regs, and it's time to stand up. It's time to fight for those freedoms. And part of this faith-based adoption, to me, it's sad that you should ever need legislation to protect that, but you do.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to hear your comments on the Second Amendment and the so-called gun ban regulations some people want to enact.
Great question. Second Amendment, strong Second Amendment. Those are rights. In fact, I just had a phone call. It was on the way out here. A gentleman who wants, how many are familiar with the Cox-Kettler case? A few people? Okay. Cox-Kettler was in eastern Kansas, and a few years ago we had the Second Amendment Protection Act, which is if the gun or if the accessory was made in Kansas, then it stayed in Kansas, you never crossed the state line, then you never came under federal law, was what was intended to be. Well, there was 2 places in statute that it should have been changed, and it wasn't. It was only changed in one place. So 2 gentlemen were charged because they had a silencer that was made in Kansas, and they were charged by federal law. One of the gentlemen was a disabled veteran. He lost all his military. He's a young man in his 30s, and it's a horrific case. It's destroying his life. And so we needed to clean that legislation up. I was able to get an amendment on a bill this year that makes the language the same in both places in the statute. It's just critical that we have those protections and those Second Amendment rights. And all we have to do is look to history to find out how important that is. I'm sure you guys know that. And we talk about this, and you've heard, you wouldn't have heard me say it, but my constituents have. You know, the crisis in the schools, they're horrific and tragic. But how many of you remember driving to school and there were pickups in the back with guns in the back of the window, and not only were there guns in the vehicle, but the vehicles were unlocked. So we really have to question ourselves as a society. Where are we at and where are we going? What's changed? It's not the guns. So, yeah.
The individual you said that was harmed by this deal, was there anything done subsequent to the passage of the corrections that you alluded to?
Well, last year the Senate passed a resolution. I went around and got sponsors. Almost everybody in the Senate sponsored it and voted for it. And it was a resolution that went to our U.S. President and all of our U.S. delegation to ask for a pardon for these gentlemen. So I'm not giving up on it.
One other question.
Sure.
How many sanctuary cities are there in Kansas?
Cities, I'm not sure. I think there's 3 sanctuary counties in Kansas currently.
3 left.
Yeah.
3 left.
Yeah, that's
6.
an interesting situation too. We tried to pass legislation and I introduced it in committee and we got it out of committee last year. No sanctuary cities or counties in Kansas, and also to allow the highway patrol to help police with ICE. We do have a problem with illegal immigration in this nation and in this state too. We need to fix the immigration system. All of us understand how important immigration is to the nation, but we need legal immigration, not illegal immigration. Yeah.
Are you going to have a primary race?
I do. We've heard a joke about that. It's kind of interesting. We need 1 or 2 more men and we'll have Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. So, yeah. We've heard that quite a bit, but no, we do have a primary. We've been having really good success. There was a straw poll in the northern part of the district. It was in my opponent's backyard, and we did prevail in that, so we were excited about it. But, these are our friends. It's going to be a tough primary, but we're going to run like I always do. I always run a positive, proactive campaign, and I think that's what people want. In fact, they've proven it. I won my Senate district with re-election with 73% of the vote last in 2016. So I've been in the Senate 2 terms now.
How many Democrats are running for that position?
Well, there were 2, but one of them's dropped out. At least he told us he dropped out and is running now as a libertarian. So I think there's 7 people in the race right now. So it's not as many as the gubernatorial race, though.
Goes every day.
Education, I don't know very much about it, but I've read several things about how illegal immigrants in Kansas are getting free tuition to our universities. Is that still a problem? Because it costs a ton of money to go to school, and people who live here have a hard time paying for it, borrowing money up to you-know-what. And then these people get in for nothing. Is that still happening?
I don't know about for nothing, but I do know that illegal immigrants do have the pleasure, the benefit of having in-state tuition. They do not pay out-of-state tuition, which, if you think about this logically, it doesn't make any sense. Somebody from Missouri or another state that comes in, they have to pay out-of-state tuition. An exchange student who comes into the country illegally or legally has to pay out-of-state tuition. But somebody that's in the country illegally pays in-state tuition. So logistically, it doesn't even make sense. And when I introduced that bill, that was one of the first bills I worked on when I was in the legislature in the House, and we were able to get it past the House. The Senate killed it. So then I get elected to the Senate, and we cannot get any movement on that bill in either chamber. And we have tried. One of the senators, we had an opportunity to put an amendment on it, and I told him, hey, I got all excited. I'm going to put this, I'm going to try to put the in-state tuition, repeal it on the bill. And he goes, no, I got this. I was like, okay, great, because I'm working on mental health. Mental health's a big issue for our area, especially Osawatomie State Hospital. And you guys know with law enforcement and that. So I work a lot on the mental health issue. So I was really excited. He was going to try to put the amendment, and I was going to help him out. Well, the bill comes and goes, and the Senate's a little bit different than the House. The House has a number up there, and they know what bill they're working on. The Senate, you got to pay attention. Well, this senator fell asleep on the floor. Yeah, I wasn't a happy camper. He came up to me and apologized afterwards, but we may have missed our one opportunity. I haven't seen another opportunity to put that on a bill since. So, you've really got to pay attention and know what you're doing up there. So, yeah, and it wasn't any of these senators in the room.
Can you tell me approximately what percentage of the state's budget is presently allocated towards education funding?
Great question, Todd. We are right now at approximately 50% of the state budget. I'll give you a little bit of history on that. I think it's over the last 20 years, we have averaged between 49 and 51% of our state budget being for K through 12 education. So that percentage has remained pretty constant, but think about it, our budget now is at how many $billion? So it has, even though the percentages have remained, the number has increased. And what's interesting is the number that was thrown out with the legislation that passed, that would throw us up, I'm not sure about this number, but I was told it's over 57% of the budget would be K through 12 education. And it could throw us as high as 60 if that 80 million goes on. So, we really need to look at this budget cycle, this lawsuit cycle. They talk about the constitutional amendment. How many of you have heard about that?
Unfortunately.
Okay, unfortunately. But what's interesting about it, I don't think it does any different. We had a little bit of history on this when it first passed in the 1960s, I think it was. They cannot find how we got the current language that's in our Constitution. They can't find it in the journals, they can't find the history of it. So that's intriguing as to how we came up with this language. But we need to make sure that we have the right language. And I will be voting for a constitutional amendment if it comes before us, because then you get to decide. We, the voters, get to decide then. So I absolutely will be supporting a constitutional amendment to say, hey, Kansas, what do we want to do with this? Do we want to keep this cycle going, or do we want to address the lawsuits and the taxpayer-funded money being used to sue for more taxpayer money? That's the cycle that needs to be looked at. And I got to tell you guys have one of the best speakers close by. Ted's dad, if you can ever get him to come speak, he is amazing. He came down for a fundraiser for me once. They want him to be governor. I want him to be governor. So, any other questions? No, thank you guys. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Tyson. Our next speaker is our current Lieutenant Governor. He is originally from Quinter, Kansas, so obviously the big first, and currently lives in Salina, and that is Lieutenant Governor Tracy Mann.
Thanks, Travis. Y'all hear me okay? Yeah. Senator Tyson, thank you for your comments and insights to a lot of issues facing Topeka. I'm a little concerned of you encouraging more people to run for governors if there aren't already enough people in the race.
We'll wait till next election.
All good, all good. I know Tiff did as well. I would also say, in regards to her race, as Republicans, it's incredibly important that whoever wins their Republican primary, that we all work hard, even if it's not our district, to make sure that Lynn Jenkins' district stays Republican, because it's going to be a very, very hard challenge for that seat to not flip Democrat. And the same is said for the 3rd district, which is Kevin Yoder's district in Kansas City, that we all need to be helping and supporting our friends in other parts of the state to make sure that our Congress stays as Republican as possible. So with that, again, Tracy Mann, I, as was mentioned, live in Salina. I'm honored to serve as the 50th Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Kansas. I got appointed that position 60 days ago, yesterday. So we're in day 61, 62 as it is. So I just want to give you all just a little background on me, and then I want to talk about a few things happening in Topeka and some issues that we're focusing on, and then we can open it up to questions. So as mentioned, I grew up in Quinter. I will tell you that I kind of got to know Abilene because I remember when I was in the 7th grade, we had Kansas History Day at the Eisenhower Center. So I did this little silent video on Charlie Chaplin, I'll never forget, and came, bebop down the interstate and went down the street and presented that. And then when I was in my freshman year, we saved up a bunch of our raised money all year, and a lot of classes will go to Denver or go to Kansas City. We came to Abilene for the day and had a great time. But I would tell you, the time that I really feel like I got to know Abilene a little bit and sort of fell in love with your community was years ago. I was still living in Kansas City with my wife. My grandparents were living in Quinter, and they had I think it was their 65th wedding anniversary, and they said what they wanted to do for the weekend is they wanted to all meet in Abilene with our family from all over the state. My aunt flew in from California with her husband, and we stayed at the bed and breakfast, and we took the trolley, and we took a train ride, and we had a fantastic time, and I feel like I really got to know your community a little bit better. It's a fantastic place. And lastly, I have 4 small children, and they love, as do I, to come to the rodeo every early August. So when you're talking about getting ready for the fair, it made me think, well, that is coming around again, which will be a lot of fun. So, live in Salina. Like I said, grew up in Quinter. Our family farms and feeds cattle in Quinter, which is in Gove County, west of Hayes, and we have for over 100 years on my dad's side of the family. And on my mother's side of the family, we farm and feed cattle down in Stanton County, which is Johnson, which is extreme southwest Kansas. So it's kind of funny. I'm 41 years old, and I'm the first guy on either side of my family since we got off the boat to be 41 and not be in production agriculture. So it's kind of funny. I mean, I wear the suit and tie because that's kind of what the gig is, but it's not, in a lot of ways, it's not really who I am. My dad and brother still farm together. I went to K-State, and there really wasn't room on the family farm for 3 families, so I had to figure out what I was going to do. And so I ended up going into commercial real estate, which is what I've done to this day. I'm in the commercial real estate brokerage business, where I represent mostly industrial companies all over the state, certainly in Salina, Topeka, well, Manhattan, Topeka, a little bit Junction City, Kansas City, and then down to Wichita. I like my industry because a lot of time, if you know what industrial companies are doing, it can be the kind of a leading indicator of what's happening in our economy. So I really enjoy that aspect of it. So I'm a big goals guy. So at the start of the year, I write my goals. So I had 30 goals for this year, and being lieutenant governor wasn't even on the list. So this has been kind of a whirlwind tour for us. Audrey and I, we have 4 small children. I have a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 6-month-old back in Salina. So we have a very active and fun household. And Audrey in Saline County is part of Saline County Federation of Republican Women and really enjoys that. So I would say this, I have really enjoyed and appreciated working with our new governor, Governor Jeff Collier. If you all have not met him yet, I'm sure that you will. I have been very pleased when I think about the future of our state with his leadership. Clear vision, broad shoulders, has a big heart, and is a surgeon by nature, and he's a doer. And so you have seen him and I traveling the state a lot since we came into office, and you're going to see that continue. It's conservative and very clear idea of where we should take this state, and something, when I was weighing whether or not to serve as lieutenant governor, was easy for me to get behind because I think and have been very impressed with the job that he has been doing and will continue to do. So as we look out, we spend a lot of time listening, traveling the state. I think the first step that you have to do, you have to listen. You have to get out and talk to people and really listen so far as what the needs of citizens are, and then we work to serve, and then we try to lead out of that. So that is our game plan and path moving forward. So far as priorities, and I know certainly we talked about some of the things that are happening in Topeka and in the state, we are focusing every day on how do we create jobs and build a better economy in Kansas. That's near and dear to my heart because I often think about how do we build a Kansas that Quincy, Austin, Whitney, and Elise will want to, if they so choose, have a job that's interests them, that's well-paying, so that they can, if they so choose, live and raise their kids here in Kansas. A big part of that is having a good workforce. As we know, the unemployment rate in our state is low, the unemployment rate in our country is low. It amazes me that although we have a low unemployment rate, we have a lot of workers that are still on the sidelines, and we, unfortunately, as we know, have a lot of businesses that can't find the workers that they need. And so there are many times they disconnect between the education system and what the private sector needs, and we're working to try to bridge that gap, increase communication, and have the education system produce the workers that we need. Both K through 12, higher education, or college degrees, and also technical training, associate's degrees. We need all of those skill sets and that training to grow our workforce. Second thing that's very important to the governor is supporting education. He laid out his priorities in the education bill, in which we were talking about earlier. Those priorities, as he laid them out, are we have to keep our schools open. I agree with Senator Tyson that it should not be the Supreme Court's responsibility or role in our government to determine how much money is spent on schools. That's the case today, whether we like it or not. We support a constitutional amendment. In the meantime, we have to figure out how to keep our schools open. Second priority is to make sure that any increase in funding from the legislature is phased in over time and is done in a way that does not raise taxes on Kansans. And in the out years, we understand it's going to be difficult, but we believe that bill will do that. But we have to grow the economy for that to happen, and that's what we're focusing on doing. And additionally, we have to have results. If we're going to spend more money on education, we have to have defined results so that taxpayers are getting a benefit and are seeing that occur. The bill lays out the framework of that. A few things that are in the bill that we like are paying for students' ACT scores to take ACT tests. Also, the state would pay for students a few times in high school to take skills assessments so that they would begin to understand earlier on in high school what it is that they might be good at to get them thinking about different careers that they might have. So that's really important. And I would say big picture, a third priority of the governor, and I support him in this as well, is how do we increase the quality of life of Kansans? How do we, and part of that is maintaining our current quality of life, which means we as a state need to continue to be pro-life. Very important. The Second Amendment is a very high priority for the governor and I. And how do we increase our quality of life? Part of that certainly is education, part of that's workforce training, and that gets into a lot of other things as well. The governor has me focused a lot on agriculture and on rural related issues, which is my background, and I enjoy doing that. I'll tell you, I know Abilene, you would understand this, but 44.5% of the state's economy is agriculture. I said 44.5% of the state's economy is agriculture. So when people ask how is Kansas doing economically, in many ways you have to stop and ask, well, how is agriculture doing? And the answer to that is it's pretty rough right now in a lot of segments. Livestock industry, decent year last year. Farms, decent year last year because of high yields, but right now we are in an environment, and could be a sustained environment, where we have low commodity prices. That's hard for equipment dealers, that's hard for repair, that is hard on farms' bottom line. So certainly low commodity prices is a challenge. Trade is a challenge. I think everyone in this room understands that the majority of the products that we grow in Kansas agriculture are not consumed by Kansans, but they are sold to and consumed by people outside of the border of our state, and many times outside of the border of the United States. So we have to have trade agreements in place that provide markets for our farmers to sell their products at high prices. Certainly the trade wars that we're seeing happening over the last few months with China is concerning as it's impacted commodity prices. You know, in Salina, well, late January, when the administration announced a tariff on washers and dryers coming from China, that next morning, the price of Milo in Salina dropped 80 cents. It was at $4 and dropped to $3.20 that morning. So without a doubt, there's a direct link between trade and commodity prices and profitability for our farms. And that's something that we are pushing on, and we're pushing on that in a lot of ways, from letters to the president, to discussions with the vice president, to discussions with Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue. The Undersecretary of Agriculture is in Kansas week before last, discussing with him about that as well. So that's a big priority, and another priority for us, and that we're very concerned about in regards to agriculture, is this drought that we're all in. And you know, this doesn't affect the entire state, but the bulk of our state is in a very severe drought. Certainly the farther south and further west you go, the worse it gets. The drought's not going to end until Mother Nature chooses for it to end, but in the meantime, we can do some things to help soften the blow from a regulatory standpoint. We're working to do those things. An unfortunate consequence of the drought are wildfires that y'all maybe read about, or that you see coming up in the last week. It's sprang up again. We are trying to be as proactive as possible. So as fighting wildfires, supporting the people on the ground, sending Black Hawk helicopters in to try to douse those flames before those fires get any larger than they have to be. So from a state standpoint, those are some things we're working on. So this kind of a little quick overview. Happen to open up to any questions that y'all have? Yes, sir.
School financing.
Yep.
You say you're for a constitutional amendment to make the legislature the ones that decide how much is sufficient.
Yep.
But yet it feels like the governor caved pretty quick to say, okay, you need $500 million, I'm going to give you $500 million. Oh yeah, but I'm also for a constitutional amendment. Well, there's an opportunity here in a few weeks for a second bite at the apple. When is the point to play hardball with this? If Kansas government continues to grow, economy's not very strong, but yet now schools seem to, at will, through the courts, get whatever they want. When will the governor say, okay, I'm going to play hardball with this, I want a constitutional amendment, and I'll give you your $500 million only if we get a constitutional amendment? Is that unreasonable?
Yes, it's a good question, and a lot of it has to do with the timing. I think there's two issues. There's what do we do in the immediate when the court says they have to have a response by April 30th, and then what do we do in the longer term? So that's the tension that we're in right now, and that's the path for now is going to be signing and supporting schools, but the long-term fix is we have to have a system where the legislature, which like Senator Tyson said, effectively the people are determining how much money is spent on our schools, not the court system. So, yep. Yes. Yep.
I don't know if you were in on a lot of this, but or know much about it. But I think it was this past summer, there was a bit of an issue in eastern Kansas around Tonganoxie about a Tyson plant that was coming in, kind of got ran out of town.
Yep.
I mean, I don't want to live next to one myself, but I just thought that was kind of a blunder that maybe could have brought dollars in production agriculture into our state. And I think it's in Tennessee now, or something like that.
The Tonganoxie, the Tyson plant was going to go to Tonganoxie, and that was before my time, but I can speak to it certainly, and that is that the community of Tonganoxie decided they did not want that plant there. Right away, many other communities around the state raised their hand and said we would love to have a poultry facility in our community. Those discussions are still ongoing. There was a bill passed by the legislature that changes some things in regards to setbacks and number of poultry that could be in one location that sort of helps promote the poultry industry and its future expansion in Kansas in areas that would like to see it occur. And if they come here and what that looks like, we will see. Yep. Well, you all been great. I know you've sat here for a long time. Thank you very much for having me. Happy to stick around and answer more questions, but thank you all very much.
Well, I actually appreciate Lieutenant Governor and Senator Tyson for being here. I actually have in my notes this evening to